Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, May the 13th, 2020. It is currently 1:09 p.m. Central Time, which is a little frustrating because I technically wanted to be starting at 1 p.m. Central. I wanted to start right at 1 p.m. Central, but I'm about 9 minutes late, but that's okay. I'll go 9 minutes over time later this evening. Let me explain what's going on. I'm currently here at Victory Baptist Church. I'm here for the Wednesday evening service, but that doesn't begin until 7 p.m. Now, of course, at 7 p.m., I will be live streaming the service, and you can listen to us live under the VBC podcast if you want to listen to us live. But I came out here way early to do live broadcasting. So I wanted to start right at 1 and basically live broadcast 1 p.m., and I don't know how many different times, but live broadcasting from 1 p.m. till basically 8 p.m. tonight. That is the goal. So now I have to go 8:09 p.m. to make up for it. So I'll have to make sure my message tonight goes long. No, I'm not going to do that, but I am here live. So this is a unique opportunity. If you're listening to me live right now, if you're tuning in live, I'm going to be here for how many hours is that? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to be here 7 hours. 7 hours I'm going to be here. Yes, my math is so bad I have to count it out. That's okay. I'm going to be here for 7 hours, sitting here in front or behind this microphone. So if there's some topic you want me to talk about, if there is a news article you want me to discuss, if there's anything, you need to email me as soon as possible at newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com. I will look at what you send me, and if I feel like that I can offer something, if I can offer a different perspective, I can offer something unique, I can offer something that's worth your time, then I will do just that. So again, I will be here from, I got here at 1. I got here a little before 1, but it takes forever to unpack all of my equipment and to bring it in and set it up to do a podcast. So it takes forever. So we got started a little late, but we're going to make up for it. And I'm going to be covering a lot of different things today. Let me explain. If you want to listen to me live, you got to check which podcast I may be live under. Sometimes I may be live under the VBC Bible Institute podcast. Sometimes I may be live under the non-Catholic Catholic podcast. Sometimes I may be live under the VBC podcast. So you have to kind of be looking around, and then sometimes under the Theology Central. So there's a lot of different podcasts. If you have the Spreaker app and you're following all of those podcasts, there's a good chance you'll get a notification when I am live. So, make sure you're following, all of our podcasts, and then you can listen to everything. All right. So however you may hear me, if you hear me today on Wednesday, I forgot the date already. See, look what happened. Wednesday, May the 13th. If you're listening to me on Wednesday, May the 13th, and it's still in the afternoon, email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. If you have a question, a topic, anything, this is a chance, and then I will try to hit that go live button and, address the question and the email. So here is your opportunity. So take advantage of it, all right? Now, what are we going to be doing in this episode? Well, if you heard me on Sunday, I did a 1-hour lecture on Thomas à Kempis. On Thomas à Kempis, I kind of gave an overview of his life, some background, asked some important questions, and tried to get us prepared because it's starting very soon, we're going to begin kind of a series that we're going to work through the classic book, The Imitation of Christ, depending on which version you have. I have one here that is entitled Of the Imitation of Christ. I have another one here that is simply called The Imitation of Christ. So depending on your copy, The Imitation of Christ, Of the Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. Now, so on Sunday, I kind of give you an overview, I introduced, and then we're going to start working through this book. It is a classic book. There's so many editions of it that people have lost count. According to some sources, it's been translated in more languages than any other book except the Bible. It has been praised by people of all theological persuasions, from Catholicism to Protestantism and everything in between. This is a very a very important book in church history. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to agree with everything in it, and it doesn't mean that I'm telling you to agree with everything in it. But when a book kind of rises to that level, then I think it's a good thing to stop and go, hey, what's in it? Why was this book so important? What can we learn from it? What can we agree with? What can we disagree with? And try to just understand why it's played such a significant role in the lives of many professing Christians. So we will definitely be working on that. And so I invite you to join us in that study. I think it's going to be worth your time. I think I will approach it in a somewhat of a unique perspective. So please take the time to join us. And you can do this a couple of ways. You can just look for your own copy of The Imitation of Christ, or The Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis. Probably can find it free online. You can do it that way. You can order a copy through Amazon. You could download a copy for your Kindle if you have a Kindle. There's a lot of different ways that you can follow along, but I am still offering people the opportunity to get a free copy of the book. All right. Now, this opportunity, its time is running out. So if you want one, here's what you have to do. It's pretty simple. Now, first, it's open to all Apple users. I apologize, but this is about the only way I can pull this off. If you are using an Apple device of any kind, go to the Apple Podcast app, find the Theology Central podcast, find the VBC Bible Institute podcast, find the VBC podcast, find the Non-Catholic Catholic podcast, and leave us a rating and a review. A 5-star rating and a positive review. Send me an email at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Say, I'm so-and-so. I left this review. I left a 5-star rating. Here is my address. Here's my first and last name. I want a copy of the book. I'll verify that you left a review and a rating. Once I see it, boom, I order you a copy from Amazon and have it shipped directly to your home or whatever address you give me, okay? So if you want a copy of the book, that's easy. That's an easy thing to do. Just leave some ratings and reviews. That's what we need. And the reason we're doing that is we want the podcast to be able to be found by people. If you go look for a Christian podcast right now on, Apple Podcasts or any of the podcast apps, you're going to find Joel Osteen because he's got about 1 billion reviews, right? So, that's a little hyperbole, but you get the idea. So we are a very, 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 very small fish in a very big, gigantic ocean of podcasting. So if you can help us out, then we want to send you a free copy of the book. That's simple. If you're not currently a follower of ours on Spreaker, download the Spreaker app, or even if you have the app downloaded, make sure you're following us. I'll get a notification. I can look at the list of, you can send me an email, newsif@yahoo.com. Say, hey, I just followed you on Spreaker. My name is so-and-so. I'll go look at the list of followers and go, there they are. Boom. Then I'll just make sure you give me your address and I will send you a copy of the book. So that's simple, very simple. So it's you're helping us out, and so we want to send you a copy of the book. Now, obviously, we are limited in how many we can send out, so we'll have to stop it at some point. But so I will just say this: time is running out. If you want a copy, you need to do that soon. Okay? If you're listening, let's see. I think I can, we'll leave it there. There may be one other way that we could expand the giveaway, but we'll stop there and I may announce another way the next time we talk about Thomas Kempis, all right? So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be studying The Imitation of Christ, written by Thomas Kempis. If you missed my lecture that I gave on Sunday, where I went an hour talking about his life, history, please go listen to that. It's called Thomas Kempis. It's under the VBC podcast. Today, we're going to return we're going to return to the topic of Thomas Kempis. We're going to look at his life and a little overview, but we're going to do so by listening to a lecture taught by someone else at a university. They taught a lecture. They gave a lecture on Thomas Kempis, and I thought, let's listen to it, and we'll see. I'll see if I can offer anything from it, and we'll kind of go there. Now, the microphone that was being used for this lecture, I don't know where the microphone was located. At times it sounds like it's about half a mile away. So this is not the greatest audio quality, but I still thought it would be, you're going to get my perspective. So let's listen to a different perspective, and then I can offer my thoughts and just try to give you just what I'm trying to do is just trying to give this a little bit more time to get everyone ready, to get everyone prepared to start looking at the of the book, start looking at the book of the Imitation of Christ. I have the copy that says of the Imitation of Christ in front of me, so that's why part of me was going to say the Imitation of Christ, and the other part of me was going to say of the Imitation of Christ. So of the Imitation of Christ, I'm trying to give you a chance to kind of get ready. Get a copy of the book, get a notebook, and then I think it'll be a fun time and hopefully very beneficial. All right. So I thought to kind of drag this out a little bit longer, let's listen to this lecture. I've got a Bible open. I've got a pencil. I don't know if you can hear that. I got a pencil. I got a notebook. I've got two copies, two different versions of the Imitation of Christ, two different translations. So I got a modern translation and an older translation. So we'll be using both of those. I have all my stuff here. I've got bottles of water. So let's just jump in. It's not a long lecture. It's only like 22 minutes long. I went a lot longer, probably because I can't do anything in 22 minutes. So we'll see what we can learn, and hopefully we'll all benefit. So if you want to win a copy of the book, you know what to do. It's pretty simple. If you're confused, email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, and I will help you figure out what you can or can't do to win a copy of the book. All right, there you go. It's just a way of saying thank you for leaving a rating and a review. All right, so because that helps us out. All right, here we go. Let's listen to this and see what we can learn today.
Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and the Harvard Classics Lecture. This is Harvard Classics Lecture number 58, Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ. This is a Christian devotional text written in Latin, we think roughly 1418 to 1427. Now, if you haven't been following my earlier lectures for Harvard Classics, I recommend that you go to learnstrong.net, go down that left-hand side and find the folder for Harvard Classics, and at least watch the lecture that precedes this one, lecture number 57, where I've spent some time with St. Augustine's Confessions, especially books 1 through 10, because those are the ones that are provided in this text. Now, obviously the question is always going to be asked, anytime that you put together a collection of any kind of texts, why was this included and that not included, etc., etc.? And so obviously the question is, why Thomas à Kempis's Imitations of Christ? There's a number of views on this. I think one view is this one. Confessions, to put especially these two titles together, Confessions, St. Augustine's Confessions, in many ways tells you what you should want, right? That is to say, love of and for God, right? Imitations of Christ will tell you how to get there. This is a method, if you will, okay? And that's what we mean by it being a devotional text. And I would say this as well, because some readers are turned off by the very fact that Dr. Eliot would have selected a text like Imitations of Christ. And to that degree, I'm going to say something similar to other texts that were kind of maybe religious in their orientation, like Milton's Paradise Lost. That I believe that this is a text which can challenge both the Christian as well as the non-Christian, or even the non-believer or the non-religious. I think that there's a lot of things that we're going to find in this text about, for example, training, self-improvement, that will speak directly maybe to the non-believer or the non-Christian, the non-religious. Just to remind, our learning theories always we're building on.
A couple of thoughts. He's moving really quick there. He's going really fast. A couple of things. Confessions by Augustine, obviously another classic. Maybe at some point we'll cover that book as well. We need to get back to On Christian Doctrine by Augustine. We were covering that as a church because that's kind of a famous hermeneutical text. And so I may jump into some parts of On Christian Doctrine by Augustine and do that for the Theology Central podcast. He doesn't really give you a lot of, he basically kind of looks at it from a pragmatic standpoint. Hey, even if you're not religious, you should look at this book because it has some things in there that could be helpful or be useful. I think sometimes I don't always look at it from a pragmatic approach. I think when a book reaches a level where millions upon millions of people have read it and it's been so influential and people all around the world talk about it, I think it's always interesting, even if you don't agree with the book's philosophy or its theology or whatever. I think it's always interesting to go look at a book that rises to that level to go, I wonder why. Why was this so influential? I do the same thing with music. If you know, Kenny Chesney has the number one album right now. Everyone thought Drake was going to have the number one album, but Kenny Chesney, a country artist, ended up with the number one album and knocked out Drake the rapper. And like, wait, what happened? Why is Kenny Chesney's album number one right now? So if you go listen to it, you're like, well, I can kind of see maybe why. And then you kind of start looking at what's going on in music streaming. And then you find out, since the COVID-19 situation has occurred, country music has had an explosion of streaming numbers. People are listening to country music in droves right now. Why is that? Is there something about country music that people find comforting, or there's something about it while listening to it while they can't go to work? I mean, what's going on? So sometimes you just go and listen and look at something just because, hey, it's reached this level of influence, of popularity. Let me go see why. So I kind of look at it from that point, that the book's been translated, in almost every language on the planet. It's who knows how many editions? I mean, thousands upon thousands of editions. I don't even know how many different translations. I mean, it's all over. It's all over the place. And I, like I said, I came in contact with a book in an independent fundamental Baptist church, which would have been the place that you would think would have never even mentioned the book, didn't even know the book existed, or would be condemning the book, since it's obviously clearly Roman Catholic. So it's really, and so many Protestants have praised the book, even though it's clearly Roman Catholic, while other Catholic books are viewed as heresy and don't even touch it. So why did this one have an influence in the Protestant world? So I think there are historical reasons for at least wanting to know what's in the book, why so many people found the book to be so helpful. Now, it's interesting. He described confessions as kind of saying, here's what you should want. You should want to love God, serve God. God is what you should want. And then he stated that Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis is more of a how-to manual, how to get what you want, which is kind of an interesting perspective. We'll see if that plays out. I think there's definitely some how-to there, but we'll see. That's just kind of an interesting perspective of comparing or placing those two famous books next to one another. But I would just challenge Christians. A lot of Christians don't want to study church history, but you can go back and find out all the books that have been very instrumental in church history and at least read them, even if you don't want to study actual church history, because by reading those famous books that, reached a major level of significance within church history, that will at least get you into church history, because you're reading, a perspective that represents a certain time within Christian history. And if you don't realize that, Christianity's perspective changes dramatically over the years. I mean, you read Christian books from the 1700s, and you read Christian books written in the 1980s or the 1990s or the 2000s. It's a whole different perspective on Christianity and the Christian life, which raises a very important question. Why? Why did it change? Because I thought the Bible was the final authority. Does that reflect the idea that in many cases culture changes Christianity more than Christianity changes culture, and it's something we have to admit to? I don't know. There's a lot there we could discuss, but yeah, so there you go. Let's see where else he goes here. He's going to give you, I think, their learning instructions, I think is what he called them, so let's pay close attention.
Of this learning theory of connecting new information to old information. So if there's anything that a study, for example, of the Harvard Classics is doing for us, and I hope there's one or two things, it's that it's challenging us to at least find meaningful information that we can relate to from our own life experiences. In regards to the way we approach reading texts, just to remind, we're always playing the game of the 3 levels of reading. What does the text say? Level 1. What does the text mean? Level 2. Here, 2A, themes, messages. 2B, some kind of rhetorical techniques, not what the writer says, but how the writer says it. And then finally, at level 3, how can I relate to a text like this? At 3A, how can I relate to other texts? And at 3B, how can I relate to myself personally? Now, let's do some quick background information for...
If you ever went to college or university, you may have flashbacks, because sometimes in college the professor just the way they speak, I mean, that's not the way you teach. I mean, I don't get sometimes sometimes teachers maybe, I think there's this is an interesting theory, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree. I think there's teaching, right? And teaching in some people's mind is just, I stand and just put forth information, right? I just put forth information, just spew it out, right? Just spew it out. And then I believe there is teaching mixed with quality presentation or good speaking skills, right? In other words, some teachers have no skill when it comes to public speaking. They're horrible at it. Like, he just went through that so quick. I mean, he went through those, here. Now remember, here are the levels. Now, he's obviously assuming that the students already know this. He's reading from notes, so maybe it was in their syllabus. I don't know. But I would think it would be time to really, repeat those. You're getting ready to start a look at a new book, The Imitation of Christ. You're getting ready to look at Thomas Kempis. I think it would be, for me as a public speaker, I would want to repeat those 2 or 3 times to ensure that everyone knows, hey, I want you to get something from this book, and here's how you're going to do those. What does the text mean? What is the deeper level of the meaning? And then what does this mean to me personally? Okay, I think those were the 3 that he mentioned quickly. But teaching requires not just, hey, I stood there and I gave you the information. That's how a lot of teachers feel. Sometimes that's why I think what the teacher teaches and how students do on a test, and I'll make some teachers mad, but I think sometimes the issue is not with the students and with their studying. I think it's with the teacher's lack of ability to communicate the material in a way that anyone's going to remember it. I mean, if you're just up there going, boom, done, boom, we covered Imitation of Christ in 18 minutes. All right, good, go home. Whoa, okay. I think, and now we got a test on Monday. Wait, you failed the test. I said it. Well, you said it, but you said it like there's a difference in teaching, but instructing in a way that the students get it, that you're emphasizing. And here he's flying through this so quickly that, I mean, I'm kind of regretting that we're even listening to this, because I don't think, how much time does he have left? He's got 19 minutes. Unless he slows down tremendously, then I don't know what we're going to take away from it. But please note, there's the ability to teach, which is just speaking and putting out information. And then there's the ability to really teach, to really instruct by also implying, or applying, that would be the best way to put it, by applying some basic public speaking skills. Repetition, emphasis, changing, the tone of your voice, increasing it, lowering it, doing some different things to really get people to get the information. So I do a lot of repetition. It drives some people crazy. I know. I'll get emails, you repeat yourself 50 times. Don't do that. Well, I'm trying to make sure you get the point. I'm trying to make sure because I guess I always speak. Maybe here's my flaw. Maybe it's a flaw, maybe it's a good thing. I always speak, even when I preach, with the idea that everyone listening is going to take notes. When I do a podcast, I literally speak as if people are taking notes. I don't care what I'm covering. I just have the image that people are going to open something and they're going to take notes, or they're going to grab their phone and try to type something out, because I believe that I'm not going to be trying to give you information that I don't believe is important enough for you to write down, study, and look up. So maybe the college professor realizes no one is taking notes, or he just realizes they're going to have to take notes quick. I don't know, but I just find that interesting that, I would think that these learning skills, these ways of learning would be critical right before you start a new book, but that's me. But they that's the problem with the educational system, is you have a limited amount of time to cover material. So you just move through it quickly. And I've always wondered, the way you teach gives the impression that here's what you need to do. I'm going to go through this quick, memorize 3 or 4 key points. Those will be on the test, and then put it down on paper, and then you can go ahead and get the credit. And it's that's not learning. That's memorization. I hate sometimes that education isn't really about education. It's about accomplishing a task to get a grade, to get a credit, to get a piece of paper. It's not about learning. And I just hate that. But okay, here we go.
imitations of Christ. There are some who argue, and I think probably rightfully so, that other than the Bible, this may be the most read Christian text of all time.
I want you to hear that. Outside of the Bible, the imitation of Christ may be the most read Christian text. You have the Bible, and then outside of the Bible, the imitation of Christ may be the most read Christian text outside of the Bible. And he thinks that is correct, and others have argued that as well. That is great. So right there, he should have led with that. That's why you should want to study this book. Even if you don't like Christianity, you should see what at least shaped Christian thought. And now here's the question we should have before our study. All right. If that is true, or let's just assume it's true, then as we read it, we should be looking for how this book influenced Christianity from the time it was written until, well, today in 2020. Can you look back over church history and go, whoa, you see the influence of the imitation of Christ right here? Look on that page. Yeah, that influenced Christianity. I mean, that's a major claim. The most read Christian text outside of the Bible is The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. And if you haven't read it, well, sometimes I'm shocked by how many Christians don't know what's been significant in the faith that they profess. I'm always baffled by Christians' ignorance of Christianity. You'll say something about Christianity like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know. That was one of the most significant events in church history. Never heard of it. You're a Christian, right? So shouldn't you want to know the history of the faith which you tell everyone you believe in? Shouldn't you want to know? You claim to be a Christian. Shouldn't you want to know something about Christianity? And that's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Sometimes it'll be an atheist will throw out something ugly about church history, and a Christian will be like, wait, that happened? You know, like, you're the Christian. You should know. The atheist shouldn't know, okay? It shouldn't be at a secular university teaching, not at a Bible college, saying, hey, guys, the imitation of Christ is perhaps the most read Christian text outside of the Bible. That Christians should know that. Why would lost people know that? Like that, see, that sometimes baffles me. We should know our own history. We should know it. We should understand it. We should analyze it. We should struggle with it. Again, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right? I think that's just the way it should work. All right, here we go.
It was printed. Think about this stat. It was printed 745 times before 1650. I mean, think about that. 1600 is the year Shakespeare publishes Hamlet, just to give you a sense of it, right? Early debate, of course, always is going to happen early on about some of these ancient texts, who actually was the author. And Thomas à Kempis is usually decided upon being the author of this text. Kempis from 1380 to 1471. He was part of the modern devotion movement, which attempted to return religion back to its more spiritual roots. And this text is very much a devotional text. It's a text that was read by the spiritual seeker, usually often priests, monks, who would then come to the text to hear, what do I need to do to find proper religious behavior, okay? Now, it's divided into 4 books, right? And we're going to take a look at each one of these. I will say this here in a moment again. Like I've said in any number of these lectures, I wish I could just read this text in its entirety with you. I obviously don't have the time to do that. It is an amazing text on so many different levels. I want to, however, focus on 3 different areas of study for us. The first is the area of what we will call energy conservation or focus. We've sometimes commented, for example, about this notion of monkey mind, the monkey in a cage with the fire underneath the metal cage, and the minute that the fire hits the cage, the monkey's mind, the monkey starts jumping all over because he's getting burned, and then enter the bees, the wasps, to sting the poor monkey. And this is the notion of what the human mind is often like. We're jumping around all over the place. This text is actually going to speak a lot about energy conservation, focus, that ability to take care of monkey mind by turning the fire off underneath the cage and letting the wasps out of the room so the poor monkey doesn't get stung over and over again. The notion of the power of distractions in any kind of training. Why is it the case, watch this, why is it the case that I will say I'm going to do X, and I start out to do X, and then I find myself no longer doing X? Why is that the case? Training comes to mind immediately. I'm going to get up, I'm going to do this training every morning, I do it for 3 days, then I'm done, then a month later I come back. What made me stop? That kind of distraction question is one that will be addressed powerfully, I think, in this text. Unlike, I would point out, any other text that we've studied, with maybe the possible exception of some parts of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, where he will make some similar kinds of arguments that are going to sound very similar to some of the stuff we're going to pick up on here. The second thing we're going to look at is the distinction, and we've mentioned this before in other lectures, the distinction between will and sustained will. Think about that one for a moment. I'm going to make up my mind to do something, right? But then I don't do it. The difference between will, saying I'm going to do something, believing it's important to do something, and then sustained will. I actually am able to continue to do it day after day, month after month, year after year for the rest of my life. If I know that it's important, well then why not do it? Or as we will say in our study of St. Augustine's Confessions, we said this, the only sin is to forget, right? That is to say, we miss the mark, that's what really the word sin means, when we have forgotten what it is that we set out, that we told ourselves was important. So if energy conservation matters and will versus sustained will matters, the third one is going to be this notion of a sense of duty. Duty to self, duty to others, the power of sacrifice, the notion that one should leave the world somehow a better place than one found it when one arrived. All of this we will hopefully derive from our study. Let's now turn to Book 1, Admonitions Profitable for the Spiritual is the way that it is outlined. I'm going to do 2 things with each one of these books. I'm going to give you the highlights of what I think to be the most important stuff from the book, and then I'm going to jump into it. I'm going to show you some of my favorite lines. You obviously will have your favorite lines as you're doing your own reading and study, I hope, of this text, right? First of all, withdrawal, renunciation is important. The notion that the outward life is not as important as the inward life. The emphasis here is on the interior life. This renunciation idea is one that's central to any kind of training, if you'll think about it. So, for example, if you're serious about losing weight, you're going to have to give up certain kinds of cuisine offerings. That's part of the gig. Do you get me? So, in other words, this notion, now obviously we're speaking here in very theological terms. I'm going to use this text to speak not just in theological terms, clearly that's what it's intended for, but also to speak in ways that will help students, those of us who are reading this text, who maybe aren't necessarily interested in Christian theology so much. The notion as well of giving up the pride of learning and education, speaking theologically, right? And to live with the simple. Remember what we said about St. Augustine in Confessions, that for a very long time in his life, he didn't want to have anything to do with the Bible because he thought it was beneath him. The translation he was working with in Latin was bad Latin, and he felt like he was somehow smarter or better than that kind of thing. This text is going to say you've got to give up that kind of pride if you're ever going to really advance in your training. That will lead to the next point, and this one's a huge one, the importance of humility.
All right, now that idea of withdrawal and focusing on the interior life, that is that idea shows up, especially in a lot of Catholic devotional material. I think that's a great emphasis. If you read a lot of Catholic theology, the interior life, develop the interior life, withdraw, focus on the interior, withdraw, focus on the interior. You may put away this, put away that, so that you can focus on this interior part of your being and yourself. That is an interesting focus. It shows up a lot. I think there's been a lot of I think it's been emphasized in different ways at different eras within church history. So it's an interesting concept. This idea of putting away pride, I think, is very beneficial. I think there's going to be a lot of beneficial concepts as he's giving us really quick. I'd like to talk about each one, but we will discover some of this as we read it for ourselves.
The idea that you don't know it all, that you do need sometimes help with learning new things, right? Or learning how to unlearn the things that you've already known. You're going to have to, we're told in this first book as well, learn to accept the world's contempt, their contradictions, their jeering, their laughing, and the like. Another big one, write this one down. We're going to hear a lot in this first book about the importance of solitude, silence. Okay? The idea that there's so many voices always out there in the world. It's constantly, voices, that when training begins in earnest, you have to somehow block out a lot of that stuff, the distractions, right? Another one, and this will not surprise us given our study of Confessions, St. Augustine's Confessions, if you're really going to grow forward, you have to learn to meditate on death. You got to learn to live as a pilgrim and to see this experience of this world as being very short-lived. We've said this before in earlier lectures, and we'll say it again. Notice the significant point. You've never met a 200-year-old person. I mean, just let that sink in. You've never met a 200-year-old person. You won't. And here's why. Because you only get to swing at the park for a little bit, and then you got to go bye-bye in the van. They were teaching this to us when we were young. I don't want to go to the van. I want to stay and play at the park. No, that's not the way this works. The way this works is you have to make sure that you enjoy your time at the park, because it is short-lived. Finally, another major observation here is that you got to make a distinction between hope and overconfidence, right? I mean, you got to have a reasoned hope. Think about that in regards to training, and think about that in regards to planning and learning. I'm going to read all of the books in the library, and I'm not a very good reader. How about this? Let's just stick with a couple of books, right? I'm going to read all of the Harvard classics. Well, maybe let's just read a little bit of the Harvard classics every day. That notion of hope versus overconfidence, or setting one's goals so high that they're unattainable, unachievable, and then we just give up. Well, let's jump now into the text itself, and I'll give you a few of my favorite passages. I hope that you are finding your own. This one comes from the very beginning in the 3rd chapter. All perfection hath some imperfection joined to it in this life, and all our power of sight is not without some darkness. A lowly knowledge of thyself is a surer way to God than the deep searching of man's learning. Not that learning is to be blamed, nor that the taking account of anything that is good, but a good conscience and a holy life is better than all. Or how about this one from chapter 5? He says it this way: if thou wouldst profit by thy reading, read humbly, simply, honestly, and not desiring to win a character for learning. Ask freely and hear in silence the words of holy men, nor be displeased at the hard sayings of older men than thou, for they are not uttered without cause. Well, we think, a level 3A observation, we think of Francis Bacon's of Studies, read not to contradict or to confute, right? That notion that when you read, make sure you're paying attention to the ways that you read, to actually read humbly, right?
There's one of those situations. He read those quotes so fast, I doubt they even entered into your brain. I mean, he read those so quickly. I want to go back and look all of them up, but we will cover it in a far different way, because this, again, I'm just using this as a supplemental introductory to what I spent an hour talking about Thomas à Kempis himself. He's kind of getting into the text a little more than I thought he would, because I saw how short this lecture was. So I figured it was going to be a brief overview of his life. He's already jumping into the text. He didn't really talk about his life. And one of the things he's left out of this is, just make sure we understand Thomas à Kempis entered into a monastery at the age of 19 or 20. And when we say monastery, the rules for the monastery he was at, they didn't really have the vows like in other monasteries, but it basically ran as a monastery. So he basically lived his life in a monastery, spent most of his time in a cell, just reading books. He didn't really, the other monks kind of realized Thomas à Kempis, man, that guy can think and he's got deep thoughts. So they kind of basically just left him alone with all of the other things. And Thomas à Kempis didn't want any responsibilities of administration. He wanted to spend time reading, praying, and doing those kinds of things. So you have to understand when you read, and I don't know why he left this out, when we read Thomas à Kempis of the Imitations of Christ, understand he's describing a life that may be more suited for a monastery. So we have to ask ourselves, how does this translate? How does his way of living that's described in the book translates to your life and my life, where we're not living in a monastery and you go to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, maybe 6 days a week, 5 days a week, for however how many hours, and you have all these other responsibilities. How does it translate? A lot of the Catholic devotional material comes for people who are in monasteries. Well, how does that translate to your life? Like that, I think that's a key element that has to be discussed here. He just gave us some quotes, boom, and then Again, I would have, he should have, I don't know. That's like, if I was in the class when I'm done, I'm not going to even remember anything you said. So what's the point of the lecture? Shouldn't you want to stop and read those quotes 3, 4, 5 times? Maybe have people actually write the quote down so that they can at least take the quote. Like if you think that quote is significant, the quotes that he's giving, why wouldn't you want to at least let the students leave with at least, because some students may not even bother reading the book. They may get the cliff notes or just briefly skim it so they can pass the test. Or they may read it quickly just so they can pass the test, but they're not really thinking about it. But if you can give them a quote and read it 2, 3, 4 times and then really try to break it down, then maybe they can leave the lecture with something from the book. But that's, again, one of the issues I have with so much of school. So much of my experience in education, I've always left frustrated. Like, I want to learn something. I don't care about the stupid degree. I want to learn, okay? Can we take some time and learn, okay? But it's like, memorize this. Now get done, okay? Write the paper and just write it. And then when you're writing a paper, you've got to be focused on, I got to get this paper done by this time. And you're just trying to get the paper done. And sometimes I don't even know how much learning even takes place in the papers you've written. Because did you really get to enjoy the experience, or is it just about getting a grade? And so much of it is just about getting a grade. I wish learning could be learning. I really wish it could be, but you're getting an example of 2 quotes. I doubt you could even tell me what they say right now.
How about this one from chapter 20? This is another one that I think speaks well to our ideas of what it means to be good in training. It's better, he says, to be unknown and take heed to oneself than to neglect oneself and work wonders. Or how about this one? A merry going forth bringeth often a sorrowful return, and a merry evening maketh a sad morning. So doth all carnal joy begin pleasantly, but in the end it gnaweth away and destroyeth. We think, of course, of some of those lines from St. Augustine's Confessions, especially his addiction especially to sexual lust, and the ways in which he said he was just constantly eating at him all the time, right? We'll jump now to chapter 21.
Please note, he mentioned it briefly, but he's not really doing a very good job when he's giving you the chapters. The book of the Imitation of Christ, or the Imitation of Christ, it's broken down in really 4 books. Okay, you have the first book, the second book, the third book, and the fourth book. The first book, let me just, the way mine is broken down. The first book, Admonitions Useful for a Spiritual Life. That's book 1. Admonitions Useful for a Spiritual Life. Book 2 is Admonitions Pertaining to Inward Things. Book 3, or the third book, is Internal Consolation. All right. And then book 4 is a devout exhortation to the Holy Communion. So let me give you those again. Of the Imitation of Christ is a book, but it's within that book, there are 4 separate books. Book 1, or the first book, is Admonitions Useful for a Spiritual Life. Admonitions Useful for a Spiritual Life. The second book, or book 2, is Admonitions Pertaining to Inward Things. The third book is Internal Consolation. And the fourth book is a devout exhortation to the Holy Communion. Now, let me make sure I explain something. I don't know why he's not emphasizing this. The first book, there are 25 chapters. So if you say chapter 20, you've got to explain which book are you referring to. Chapter 20 in the first book, because in the second book, there are 12 chapters. In the third book, there are 59 chapters, and in the fourth book, there's 18. So if you give a chapter number, you've got to tell you which chapter you're referring to. If I say chapter 8, I've got to say chapter 8, book 1, or chapter 8, book 2, or chapter 8, book 3, or chapter 8, book 4. All right? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Make sure I've got that right. So he's just giving you chapter numbers, but he's not telling you which book that chapter is which chapter in which book he's referring to. So the Imitation of Christ contains 4 books. Each books have its own set of chapters, and then when you turn to book 2, the chapter numbers start back at 1. When you get to book 3, the chapter numbers start back at 1. When you get to book 4, the chapter numbers start back at 1. All right, so he didn't explain the structure of the book very well, so there you have it. There's some additional information you're getting from me for free, right? Versus going to a university, right? Here we go.
A brief line there. Busy not thyself with the affairs of others. I mean, how many of us would have, we would have saved so much energy if we would just hear what it is that's being said here. Busy not thyself with the affairs of others, nor entangle thyself with the business of great men. Keep always thine eye upon thyself, first of all, and give advice to thyself specially before all thy dearest friends. Before you can help other people, you have to help and take care of yourself. It is the high watermark of hypocrisy in all forms of life when someone is ready to hand out advice that he or she cannot follow or will not follow his or herself. It's a compelling idea. How about this one in chapter 23? It said this way: What doth it profit to live long when we amend so little? Long life doth not always amend, but often the more increaseth guilt. Oh, that we might spend a single day in this world as it ought to be spent. What an amazing line. You can read an entire volume and find one line like that. Put it on a piece of paper, put it up on your wall and look at it for a few days. Look at it again, listen to it again. Oh, that we might spend a single day in this world as it ought to be spent. What a brilliant insight that is. The great Nietzsche said this, right? Live your day as if it's the only day you have. Turn it into a work of art, and then you will know that you've done something well. To live a single day the way it ought to be spent. Powerful. Also from chapter 23, this one. Who will remember thee after thy death? And who will entreat for thee? Work now, O dearly beloved. Work all that thou canst. For thou knowest not when thou shalt die, nor what shall happen unto thee after death. Sounding very much like the biblical book of Ecclesiastes. This notion of it's time to go to work. What better time than to start now to begin to put together this thing called your life? What a challenge that one is. How about this one from book 1, chapter 25? It said this way. Remember always thine end. This notion of begin with the end in sight. Remember always thine end, and how the time which is lost returneth not. Without care and diligence thou shalt never get virtue. Sounding very much like the classic text, Sun Tzu's Art of War. Always begin with the end in mind, and then you will be able to achieve greatness in your training and in your life. Well, that's book number 1. Let's now turn to book number 2, Admonitions Concerning the Inner Life. And a couple of observations here. Humility, right, is so important and emphasized in this one. God protects and will defend the one who is humble, right? The key obstacle is mentioned in this one to spiritual life. A false sense of freedom, an overconfidence, a pride, we would say. The notion that one should attribute all good things to God is mentioned often and repeatedly in book 2. No gift is unimportant or small when given by God. The idea that whatever it is that you have, use what you have to the best of your ability. And in the last chapter 12, the Royal Road of the Cross it's called, we'll learn that it's all about your attitude. In many ways, one of the key, probably, if I had to pick one word that's probably more often repeated in this text, it is the word learn. It is the word learn. Life is about learning. And to that degree, it's all about the attitude that you have. Oh, if we could find that attitude of learning. That famous story, of course, about that student who is held under the water and begging for air. And then the master teacher says, when you want knowledge, when you want wisdom as much as you wanted air, then you'll begin to grow.
I love that. I love that story. I heard that illustration from different professors. When you want wisdom and knowledge, when you want it, as much as you would want air if I held your head underwater, then is when you actually learn something. Sometimes I wonder if Christians truly want wisdom, spiritual knowledge, if they truly want that and desire that as much as they would want air if their head was being held underwater. And I think the obvious answer is many Christians truly don't want spiritual wisdom. They truly don't want spiritual knowledge. They truly don't want to understand theology, because look at all the other things that they spend their time and effort on. They spend their time and effort on a million other issues, not reading and studying in the Bible. Even the church has played down preaching and teaching and reduced it to such a shallow level that no one's really gaining any wisdom or knowledge. Where are the people who truly want it so much that they're like someone whose head has been shoved underwater and all they care about? At that moment, they don't care about anything else other than air. I wish we had a spiritual hunger and desire for it like that. I wish we did. I wish we had there were groups of Christians who just like teach me. Here, I've got 9,000 questions. Teach me. That would be wonderful. But in many cases, I think I think many pastors envision that that's the way church is going to be. I think when you're young and you're going to become a pastor, you envision, man, I'm going to walk into a church and these people are going to be like, teach me. Come on, another hour of preaching. Come on. Can we have church Monday? Can we have church Tuesday? Come on, please. Oh, I'm going to come meet with you with questions for the rest of my life. And you kind of realize that doesn't work that way. And then that's kind of sad. And then it becomes depressing. And that's a whole different story. But I love that story because I always felt like I could kind of relate to it. I want to know. I want to understand. I want to know. And so, and now it doesn't matter what it is. If I watch a movie, I want to know. I want to understand. What were they trying to say? Why did the camera angle do that? Why did they use that kind of lighting? Why? If I listen to a song, why? What were they trying to say? Why? It doesn't matter. Why? I want to know. So not everybody wants to know. But listen, maybe other areas people don't want to know, but for Christians, when it comes to God's word, we should want to know. We should want to know and understand. So all right, here we go.
Let's turn now to chapter 1 of book 2 and hear a couple of my favorite lines anyway. A man is hindered and distracted insofar as he is moved by outward things. We think of T.S. Eliot's classic line from Four Quartets, distracted from distractions by distractions. Right? Funky mind. We're all of course cursed with it, aren't we? Yes. Chapter 3. How about this one? Therefore be zealous first over thyself, and then mayest thou righteously be zealous concerning thy neighbor. If there's anything that I think is compelling in this idea of the distinction between being religious and being spiritual, it's often drawn. Of course, it's sometimes a dubious distinction at best. But let's go ahead and say it. How many religious people often are so interested in saving you, and they never, ever give any real sense of themselves? Or, for example, people who love to talk about training to you about what you should be doing in your training, but they themselves never actually engage in their own training. How about this one from chapter 4? He says, by 2 wings is man lifted above earthly things, even by simplicity and purity. Sounding very much like Henry David Thoreau's Walden. Simplicity ought to be in the intention, purity in the affection. Simplicity reacheth towards God. Purity apprehendeth him and tasteth him. From chapter 5, how about this one? The spiritually minded man putteth care of himself before all cares, and he who diligently attendeth to himself easily keepeth silence concerning others. And then to continue, thou wilt never be spiritually minded and godly unless thou art silent concerning other men's matters, and take full heed to thyself. If thou wouldst have peace and true unity, thou must put aside all other things and gaze only upon thyself. Now, of course, let's point out that when we're talking about this self, we're not talking about this ego-driven self. We're talking, of course, about the self that is that eternal self, the self of soul, the self of spirit. Go back to our lecture on Plato's Phaedo in the Harvard Classics to hear more of an explication on that idea, right? Okay, how about from chapter 6? This one, it is the token of a humble spirit always to do well and to set little by oneself. Always work well. but work with joy in your heart, never expecting a reward. Remember those lines we quoted from the Bhagavad Gita? You have the right to work, but for the work's sake only. You have no right to the fruits of your labor. Desire for the fruits must never be your motive in working. Never give way to laziness either, right? And by the way, the Bhagavad Gita and Imitations of Christ sit side by side brilliantly, which is why the great Christian monk Thomas Merton would say it later in his life, that when he came to some of the Hindu and Buddhist texts, he was blown away by so many of the ideas that are repeated in the classic Christian texts that he knew, especially, of course, Imitations of Christ, right? Okay, let's go to chapter 10, and I've got a passage there. Chapter 10, the opening lines of gratitude for the grace of God. Why seekest thou rest when thou art born to labor? Prepare thyself for patience more than for comforts, and for bearing the cross more than for joy. Wow, this sounds very much like what we read in Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, right? That idea of, well, you were made for work. Why sit down? One of the most important things we can learn in our study of the Harvard Classics is there is no retirement. There is no retirement. There is no ceasing from work. Our life is our work. Now, the job that we do, we might change. We might end and go to a different job. There is no retirement. There is no ending on that count. Death itself is not a retirement. Interesting idea. Let's go to chapter 12 and to finish this book and hear a few readings here. Prepare thyself. This is huge in this text. Always about preparing. Prepare thyself for the bearing many adversaries and manifold troubles in this wretched life. You know that they're coming, in other words. How about this one? If thou settest thyself to that thou oughtest, namely to suffer and to die, it shall soon go better with thee, and thou shalt find peace. Our ability to relate well to this notion that we don't get to swing at the park forever. That is central to the kind of life that we get to live, right? Of course, we think immediately of Socrates as a classic example of this, as well as, of course, Christ, no question. For all men commend patience, although few will be willing to practice it. We think of Longfellow's Psalm of Life, the final lines, let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor.
And that's where it ends. It cuts off. I don't know why it cuts off, but that's where that lecture cuts off. He definitely is approaching the book more so from a secular perspective, which is just, it's always interesting. I love listening to lectures on Christian texts from secular universities. I love to, because in some cases, I feel like they miss the whole point of the text. And I think he misses the whole point of the text, all right? Yes, he's finding all these little powerful lines, and he's trying to like, oh, that's a great line, and oh, that's a great thought. But let me make sure I just drive this point home here, all right? Here is the point of the book, all right? Imitate God. Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. Imitate God. Imitate Christ. That's what the book is about. All these things he's talking about, all these little powerful points, he's doing so because he is claiming that, look, as a Christian, you are called to imitate him. You are called to follow him. That is your call as a Christian. Imitate God, imitate Christ. The reason you are doing all of these is because you're trying to imitate Christ. He's not just saying, here's all these great points that will make your life better and will give you a better perspective in life. He's telling you to think these way and do these things because you are called to imitate Christ. We are called to be followers of Christ, to have the mind of Christ, to learn to be his disciple, to follow him. That's the point of the book, and he never even mentioned that. He completely left that out. The point is, Thomas Kempis wasn't saying, hey, I've got a bunch of clever ideas and some philosophical wisdom here. No, he's saying here, imitate God, and here's how you imitate him. Here's how you imitate Christ. Here's what it looks like to be a follower of Christ. This is what the Christian life should look like. And then you can think of all of these quotes. Now, the quotes he gave are powerful, and you can write them down and meditate them on them for weeks at a time. And Christian minds have been trying to grapple with a lot of the wisdom found in the book. But just remember, the emphasis is, and here's what we have to try to figure out. Is Thomas à Kempis saying, hey, this is what your Christian life and my Christian life should look like? Now, remember, his understanding of the Christian life is he lived in a monastery from the age of 20 until he died. Can that view of the Christian life be translated into a world where we're not living in monasteries? Can it be? That's the question. And when the Bible describes the Christian life, does the Bible describe a Christian life different than the way Thomas à Kempis understands it, or are they similar? How do we view that? That's what we're going to have to. Well, he said one of the key words in the book is learning. That's what we're going to have to learn. That's what we will be learning, is what should the Christian life look like? I've been asking that question in a series of sermons that I've been doing under the VBC podcast for, I think, Christian growth and victory. What should the Christian life look like? Everyone always says, hey, here's the way to have a successful Christian life. Do this, do this. And then you kind of look at it and like, wait a minute, what is that? How does anyone live that way? What are you talking about? So I think that will be something that he never really articulated, that the life Thomas à Kempis is calling for, can it even be lived out on a college campus as a college student? Can it be lived out when you get done with your college career and you get your job and you have a family and you're going to work Monday through Friday, working, 40 plus hours a week, 50 hours a week, whatever your job requires, and you've got a mortgage and you've got this and you've got that? Can these principles be brought over in any meaningful way? Or is it all just becomes theoretical pie in the sky piety that no one can achieve? That's something that has to be discussed. So there you have it, The Imitation of Christ. He kind of got you a little bit into the book, far more than I thought. I thought it would be talking about Thomas à Kempis' life. I was hoping for something there. And you say, well, how did you not know? Because whenever I'm going to review something, I like to review it in real time so that it's not rehearsed. Like how this works. When I want to listen to something, I hit the go live button and we listen together. All right. That's how that works. So there you have it. Maybe that does add kind of an introduction to the book. I think he could have focused a little bit more on the structure of the book, but, we'll talk a little bit about that probably as we get in there. So here's the thing. If you want to win a copy of the book, remember, Apple Podcasts, look for all of our podcasts, leave a 5-star rating and write a review. Email me at newsif@yahoo.com. Say I left you a 5-star review, and here's my name, here's my address, and this is what the review or the name on the rating. And once it shows up, I'll send you the book. It's that simple. Or download the Spreaker app, Spreaker, S-P-R-E-A-K-E-R, not speaker, Spreaker, S-P-R-E-A-K-E-R, Spreaker. I think it says Spreaker Podcast Radio, something along those lines. Download the app. Follow us. Make sure you click the little star and hit the big yellow button that says follow. You'll have to put in your name and your email. When you become an actual follower, not just a listener, but a follower, and then you tell me your name, I'll look and go, oh, yep, they're on the list. Then I will send you a copy of the book until I can no longer send any more out. So time is running out. If you want a copy of the book, we'll be starting our series through the book soon. All right, I'll stop right there. I'll be here for I'll be here till 8 o'clock tonight. So if there's something you want me to discuss, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Send those emails now. All right, thanks for listening. God bless.